The ABC 17 News Special Debate Night 16 starts now.
All right, well, we would like to welcome our crowd here at Battle High School, and we'd like to welcome our viewers on ABC 17 KMIZ, along with those of you watching streaming on ColumbiaTribune.com and listening on 93.9 The Eagle. Again, I'm your host, ABC 17's Marissa Hollowed, and we know that in just 3 weeks, we're all going to be voting on who will be the next mayor of Columbia. And this, like I said, will be Columbia's third mayor in more than 2 decades. And tonight we have 2 candidates with us tonight, Skip Walther and Brian Treese. Walther is a founding partner of the law firm Walther, Antel, Stamper, PC, and he graduated from MU's law school. And Treese is a member of the firm Treese Phillips, LLC, a government and public affairs firm in Jefferson City, and he's currently the chairman of Columbia's Downtown Leadership Council as well. And tonight we're going to be tackling a large range of issues, like we mentioned, infrastructure demands. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the morale at the Columbia Police Department, as well as crime in the area. And our panel, like we said earlier, includes ABC 17's Lucas Geisler, Columbia Daily Tribune managing editor Jim Robertson, and the Eagle's Brandon Rathert. And we're going to start tonight's debate with opening statements from each of our candidates. You guys will each have 90 seconds, and I understand that ahead of time you guys actually picked numbers. So, Mr. Treese, you'll be starting.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Columbia's a great city to live and raise a family, but we have a few challenges right now that we have to deal with head on. For the last 25 years, I've been an advocate for economic development and job training, healthcare and transportation issues. I've spent my entire adult life working to create solutions to tough problems by bringing people together. Here in Columbia, I chair the Historic Preservation Commission, where we led the effort to preserve and redevelop downtown. And as chairman, I led the fight to repeal the use of eminent domain along Providence Road, saving taxpayers over $6 million. I currently chair the Downtown Leadership Council. That's the group that the City Council asked to take a look at Columbia's infrastructure issues and make recommendations to improve public confidence in how well the city plans for growth. You know, what we found was surprising. Our basic infrastructure and public safety hasn't kept pace with the rate of our city's growth, and at 28%, the public's confidence in how well the city plans for growth was at an all-time low. If we're going to be one of the fastest growing cities in the Midwest, I think we need a blueprint. As mayor, I want to build on what's great about Columbia by investing in our neighborhoods, improving our infrastructure, and adding more community policing to keep our families safe. And I'll make city government open, honest, and transparent. Instead of more of the same, I think it's time for a new page in Columbia's history. My name is Brian Treese, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work, and I ask for your vote.
And now your turn, Mr. Walther.
Thank you. I filed because our city needs a mayor who can listen to the many voices of Columbia, who can work cooperatively with diverse groups and solve problems. My name is Skip Walther, and I have the necessary experience, training, personality, and patience to lead Columbia forward. Now, in July of 2009, our city hit the 100,000 population milestone. And today, we're at about 120,000 people. That's a big jump. And while that explosive growth has provided us with many opportunities in housing, education, and business, we've also been confronted with a variety of challenges. Chief among them is the bickering between segments in our community over the trajectory of growth, a lack of communication, and a sense that our citizens have lost trust in city government. Consequently, we're at a crossroads. We can continue down this path where inevitable growth is met with anger and recrimination, or we can work together and listen to each other and search for common ground in order to move forward. I intend to be a mayor for all of Columbia, just as I have represented as an attorney the affluent and the homeless, employers and employees, landlords and tenants, the state and the defense, and virtually every demographic there is. I intend to treat everybody fairly and with great respect, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. And as you'll see, there's an audible noise when the time is up. Just to give you guys an idea, we'll be counting the time there. And I'd like to thank both of you for your opening statements. And our panelists here have prepared a very extensive list of questions that they'd like to ask tonight. And again, the rules are 1 minute for your answer and 30 seconds for the opponent's rebuttal. So, Jim Robertson, you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. And thank you, Mr. Treese and Mr. Walther, for being here.
You're welcome. Thank
My first question is to you, Mr. Walther. As Mr. Treese mentioned, the city's 2015 performance report noted that at 28% residents' satisfaction with how well the city is handling growth is at an all-time low. As you mentioned, the factions seem clear in the so-called pro-growth and the so-called smart growth. And you mentioned that we need to find common ground. How exactly will you discover that common ground and lead us there as mayor?
Well, the problem that I think we've had, a significant problem, is a lack of communication and a lack of transparency. We've had conflicting statements that have come out of city government, and that has caused a great deal of uncertainty over where we are as a city. We need to be clear about where we are. We need to be able to communicate honestly and effectively with our citizens. And we need to be able to get as many disparate groups as possible to the table in order to move forward. It was only a couple of years ago when we tried to pass a development fee, for instance. And the unfortunate fact is that not everybody in Columbia was consulted. And as a consequence, that fee failed. Now, it's unfortunate because I think almost everybody in town agrees that there should be a fee increase, but what we need to do is to bring everybody to the table instead of trying to dictate to one side of the equation or the other.
Thank you. Mr. Treese, you have 30 seconds if you would like to weigh in on that.
Well, great question, Jim. And as a member of the Downtown Leadership Council, we led the effort to restore that public trust in our city government. We did that with a couple different ways. We had several town hall meetings where we took public testimony, not just from the public, but from those developers who asked for a clear, predictable formula for how the city manages growth. And from the very public, they asked for a formula that the city should pay for its aging infrastructure, but developers should pay for how they increase capacity based on the demand for that growth.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Treese. Nearly 4 years ago, CVS began a process to get permits to build a drugstore at Broadway and Providence Road. After agreeing to a series of adjustments related to stormwater and sewer line placement, the council turned down the company's proposal because of a 2-story requirement for downtown construction, an interim requirement, by the way. After 4 years, has the city dealt fairly with CVS? And is there anything the company could or should do to get permission to build the store on that site?
Oh, of course, and I'm agnostic on whether we should have a CVS on that corner, but I'm not going to apologize for the city exercising good stewardship of its resources there. And the reality is the city owns 4 sides of that block, both with Flat Branch Park and the $2 million of taxpayer investment that we've made there, as well as our street improvements on Providence and Broadway, not to mention 4th Avenue. We also have a 76-year-old variance for the ground underneath that proposal. One thing that CVS could do is bargain in good faith. We need to have a clear discussion as to the expectations there so that we have a gateway to downtown that meets the community's expectations. The reality is CVS has made those improvements and has built buildings in neighborhoods and in downtowns across the country. Why they don't want to do that in Columbia, I don't know. But I do think that we can have an improvement on that corner that really embraces everything that we love about our downtown and introduces the public to our historic downtown Columbia.
Mr. Walther.
I think the CVS debacle, if I can say it, is a situation where the city moved the goalposts on CVS, number one. And chief among them was the change in the C2 district to require a second story on all buildings. Never been done before. And it was only done without any public input, without any vetting with the CID, of which I'm a member, and it was done at 1:30 in the morning. That was a mistake. At the same time, CVS probably should have done more to work with the city. But again, it was a situation where they tried to comply and the goalposts shifted.
All right. I want to follow up with you, Mr. Treese, while we're talking about the Downtown Leadership Council. You were also a member of that council and an ardent critic of the way the city had handled the growth that really started to boom in early 2014. You drafted a report that one of your members, Nick Peckham, helped put together as far as the infrastructure there, that when you submitted it to the city staff was largely dismissed on some of the recommendations that you had worked on to come up with, criticizing on the way they handled it. So what has the Downtown Leadership Council accomplished in the time that you've been there?
Well, great question, but let's be clear. That report was the product of 6 months of work and community engagement. We developed a 60-some page report with 14 clear recommendations for the City Council to improve public confidence. It wasn't critical, it was a way to move forward, and that was vetted by a clear consensus of University and Columbia College and Stevens College representatives, 3 at-large City Council appointees. The Boone County Commission had a representative, the CID had a representative on that commission. But that report laid on the City Council's desk for 14 months until we had a work session to really begin to parse some of the recommendations that we had to move Columbia past this infrastructure crisis that we have, and frankly, a crisis of public confidence there. I'm proud of the work that we've done, that many hours are represented in that report, and I think it's a blueprint for how we can move Columbia forward on much needed infrastructure and sufficiency of service issues.
Mr. Walther, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to anything in particular.
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Sure.
You know, leadership is more than writing reports. Leadership is about achieving results. I've been a member of the Special Business District Board and the Community Improvement District Board since 1997. The SPD oversaw the demolition of the canopy so that we could rehabilitate our historic Broadway. We also created a historic district that allowed people, the business owners and property owners in downtown Columbia, to take advantage of the benefits that the state offers in order to rehabilitate our historic properties. And we moved from an SPD to a CID in order to gain sales tax, in order to create more revenue to further benefit the citizens of Columbia with a more beautiful downtown.
So my next question is for you then, Mr. Walther. Speaking of downtown, obviously in the last several years, the development and when you look at a crane on the downtown skyline, it certainly got people's attention for the last several years. Several developers have given significant contributions or given contributions to your campaign, in particular, Aaron Fields from California, building a new planned apartment complex for 9th and Locust. You did address this at the forum yesterday when asked about it, so I'll give you another chance to explain that donation and those donations from developers. But I mean, how do you reassure voters who fear that you're beholden to these developers that come in?
Well, number one, I think my contribution list is over 330 individuals and businesses. A small fraction of those are developers. And as I pointed out in my opening, I've been an attorney for everybody in town on both sides. I've represented neighborhood associations against developers, and every once in a while I've represented a developer. With respect to the Aaron Fields situation, I represented a party on a contract negotiation who was not Aaron Fields. I do not represent Aaron Fields and never have. And it was after our transaction concluded that Mr. Fields sought me out. I didn't solicit his contribution, and he asked if he could contribute to my campaign. I believe that speaks to my professionalism and my ethics when somebody on the other side of a business transaction looks at my record and my accomplishments and has chosen to benefit me with a campaign contribution.
I think it does speak to his ethics. I mean, he's accepted more than $12,000 from downtown special interests. And if he was my attorney negotiating the best deal for me, I'd be very upset if he took a $1,000 contribution from the opposing party, especially at a tenuous time in our environment when the City Council is going to be considering new zoning recommendations for how downtown grows. You know, this is a major disagreement between Mr. Walther and myself. And I think as mayor, he would really tip the scales in favor of development when we really need to be embracing our downtown and our community's expectations for how we should grow.
May I respond to that briefly?
I don't think we have time for it,
well,
but you can bring it up in another topic.
Take 30 seconds.
Okay.
Right. My client in that transaction has made a campaign contribution to me, and so despite Mr. Treese's unhappiness with me, my client is quite happy with my services.
Thank you.
Fran?
I want to say it was funny. My friend Jim Robertson garnered a hearty laugh when he said we wanted to know what the mayoral candidates thought about Proposition 1, which has become a passionate topic for a lot of people. It's more commonly known as the roll cart issue. Technically, Proposition 1, you vote no. It would just allow discussions to keep going regarding alternative methods to collecting trash in Columbia. But incidentally, it is my first question, Mr. Treese. How do you plan to, tomorrow we go to the polls for this. It's one of the most popular topics on Wake Up Columbia on 93.9 The Eagle. The passion is it's overwhelming. How do you plan on voting?
Great question. And look, first of all, I'm glad the voters of Columbia are going to have a chance to vote on this issue. I personally plan to vote yes to keep our current system. I have a lot of concerns about the fiscal note associated with moving to a roll cart. It's about $5 million to buy everyone a roll cart, to either retrofit our existing trash trucks or to buy new trash trucks. But I want to be clear about one thing. Voting no or voting yes does not stop further discussion. We can still have that dialogue about how to reduce workplace injuries. And I think for a fraction of the price, we can invest in our trash collectors, give them the training they need, reduce the number of houses on their route so they're not hustling as fast as that causes additional injuries on the job, and really give them the pay raise that they need to reflect the tough job that they have. I'm proud to be endorsed by our public works employees, both the folks that pick up our trash and keep our streets clean, that drive those trash trucks and keep our parks clean.
Yes vote, in effect, would keep the city council for 6 months from discussing changes to the trash pickup system. Mr. Walter, how do you plan to vote tomorrow?
I'm voting no. You cannot put a price tag on the safety and the health of our sanitation workers. That, to me, is the highest priority, and if there is some inconvenience to the citizens, the safety of our employees trumps that consideration. What is important to realize about voting no is that it does not stop the debate. We can still have a discussion, and we can still move forward, and we can still provide solutions for those who will be inconvenienced with the roll cart option. The city has already announced that if somebody asks, they can receive the services that they need.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Walter, I also want to ask you, I know you're very active in the community. Obviously, you're an attorney in town, various boards. Politically, as you look to become the mayor of Columbia and you look at the city council, and I'm guessing you've probably had personal or professional dealings with some of them, is there a couple you could mention here that you feel like you align with politically, some more so than others?
No. The answer is no. It's a nonpartisan position, of course. I believe I have a good relationship with every single person on city council. I find them all to be engaged and intelligent and willing to engage in discussion and communication. There are probably political differences or philosophical differences, but I decided to run for mayor because I believe I have an ability to communicate with people and to engage people in an intelligent and an effective dialogue in order to craft solutions for the citizens of this town. And that's why I chose to run for mayor, because my experience, whether it's president of the Missouri Bar in 2009, 2010, or serving as chair of a variety of municipal boards and commissions and task force, I think I've got the leadership experience in order to work with everybody on city council and achieve consensus.
Right, thank you. Brian, would you answer that question a little differently or the same?
Well, I like to say there's no Democrat or Republican way to fix a pothole. Look, as mayor, I want to set the tone and provide the leadership necessary to really move Columbia forward. We have a lot of challenges right now, and one of the major, Skip and I agree on a lot of things, but one of the major differences is how we manage that growth, how we ensure that we have adequate infrastructure in place before that growth occurs, and how we plan for Columbia's future in a way that really helps meet the public's expectation.
Right, thank you, Mr. Treese.
Okay, my question is for Mr. Walter. Candidates are often eager to pledge their support for transparency in government, which I believe you mentioned.
Yes.
Transparency is important. This is Sunshine Week, so named because of the Missouri Sunshine Law, and in fact, a national celebration of openness in government. My question has to do with barriers to getting information from our governments. I'm sure you have requested information from the Columbia City government. I would like to know what your experience was, and is it accessible and open as it should be?
Let me say that I have a great deal of confidence in city staff. I think that virtually all of them do the best job they can possibly do, and I have a great deal of respect for their integrity. I will never, as my opponent has done, call them liars. I believe that they have a tough job, and it's a complex job, and sometimes it's difficult to effectively communicate, but I will stand behind every single city worker we have. Having said that, transparency is a difficult thing to achieve. I have said publicly that I would like city staff to minimize the number of sunshine law requests and provide information freely without requiring a formal sunshine request. I think that's a goal, but it's probably an unrealistic goal because of certain issues. But I do think that one thing that we can do, and I'm running out of time, so I'll have to answer it in another question, but I believe that transparency is extremely important for the city of Columbia.
Mr. Trees, have you made open records requests to the city, and how'd that work out?
I have, and with the state of Missouri as well, and I think it's an important part of making government accessible and restoring public confidence in our elected bodies. I mean, my general philosophy here is if it was created in whole or in part with public resources, it should be a public record. You know, during the Providence Road Improvement Project, as chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission, I had to make a sunshine request, and Steve Sapp showed up with an iPad of the Public Works Director's emails, and I could go through and find the ones that I wanted that were relevant to my request. It shouldn't have to be that hard. Rather, we should make it more accessible and easier for people to get the information that they pay for.
And will you work toward that?
That's my promise to you. Happy Sunshine Week.
Happy Sunshine. So I'm going to turn the question of campaign contributions around, and there are several unions, including the Police Officers Association and other organizations who have supported your candidacy. Why should we believe you won't be beholden to them?
Well, I take conflict of interest very seriously, and I can tell you, I think Laura Nauser's done a great job recusing herself on certain city council issues, and as mayor, I would certainly recuse myself on anything where I have a personal or professional financial interest. But I also want to be clear that I take transparency very seriously. Every month, I report to the Missouri Ethics Commission who my clients are. Anybody can go see who that is. I hope my opponent can say the same thing. But I am proud to have the support, not just of our police officers, but our firefighters and public works employees. You know, those contributions represent pooled donations from a number of people that work in our community, whether it's a UPS driver or the Schnucks employee, or you know, the people that pick up our trash in our local parks. So I'm proud to have their support. And as your own paper has said in its editorials, those contributions don't influence opinion; they tend to follow opinion. I'm proud to have fought my entire adult life for Missouri's middle class.
Mr. Walther?
I am not a politician. I never have been. I don't work in politics, and so I'm not subject to the same ethics or the campaign finance disclosure requirements that my opponent has. I'm subject to a different set of standards. It's called the Rules of Professional Responsibility for Attorneys. And if Mr. Treese were a lawyer, he would know that those rules prohibit attorneys from disclosing even the identity of their clients. I can't imagine a client coming in my office and understanding that I'm going to go out to Booch's and announce to everybody in the crowd who my new client is.
Could I chime in on that?
30 seconds.
While those rules of professional conduct do not exempt him from the Missouri Ethics Commission, and time again, Mr. Walther has lobbied the City Council and failed to register with the Missouri Ethics Commission. And I'm proud to have that the public, the voters, and elected officials know exactly who my clients are, what those issues are, and I really think this is a major transparent flaw in this campaign.
I've never lobbied in my life.
I think we can move on to closing remarks. You each will have 90 seconds for that, and feel free to address anything that you feel like you've missed. And since Mr. Treese, you started, we'll allow Mr. Walther to have the first closing statement tonight.
I do want to address one issue, and that's the issue of whether I'm a developer's candidate or not. You know, what I've seen in our rezoning and our development issues is with neighborhood associations, they have a lack of resources to deal with very complex issues, and very often the playing field is tilted heavily in favor of developers. I believe what the city ought to do is to create a position of ombudsman or ombuds, which is an impartial and independent and confidential source for neighborhood associations to use when confronted with rezoning requests or development issues, so that who would work strictly for neighborhood associations to provide them with the resources and the knowledge that they need in order to effectively address rezonings in their neighborhood. And I think that's a very important issue for our neighborhoods and for our city. And as mayor, I would introduce an ordinance that would create that position, because we don't have it at this point in time. My leadership experience as president of the Missouri Bar, as chair of the Special Business District, and chair of the CID for a combined 7 years, as chair of the Parking Task Force, and as chair of many other groups, has prepared me to lead this beautiful city forward. I'm honored to have been endorsed by the current mayor, as well as former mayors Darwin Heineman, Marianne McCollum, and Bob Pugh, as well, and Bob Smith, my friend, who recently passed. I am honored to have received those endorsements, and I intend to achieve and live up to the expectations that those endorsements necessarily include. Thank you.
And now, Mr. Treese, 90 seconds.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting this debate. I think it's been a great opportunity to get our vision out for the city of Columbia. But I do agree with my opponent. Our neighborhoods do need additional resources. Unfortunately, they need them to stand up to the developers like the ones Mr. Walther has represented. Time and time again, he has represented and lobbied the city council, whether it's rezoning the old country club for Landmark Hospital, or the Old Southwest for great hang-ups, or more duplexes in Benton Stevens, or to delay implementation of life-saving fire protection sprinklers in our fraternities. You know, when it comes to basic infrastructure and fully funding our public safety, the people of Columbia don't have a lobbyist. That's why they need people like me on the city council. And I'm excited to run for mayor. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work, and I ask for your vote.
Mr. Treese and Mr. Walther, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you coming out. And for those of you that are watching on television right now, you can switch over to KZOU to watch the final part of this debate. We'll be talking with the city council candidates for the 3rd and 4th ward seats. We'll have that coming up on KZOU. And right now we're going to switch out our candidates and bring in our council candidates. So again, thank you so much, you two.
Thank you. Thank you.
again for joining us tonight as we can. Thank you again for joining us tonight as we continue Debate 16. I'm your host, Marissa Holloway. Thank you for joining us here on KZOU, or if you're watching on ColumbiaTribune.com or listening on 93.9 The Eagle, or if you're sitting in our audience. Thank you. We appreciate you being here tonight. Now, we just heard from the mayoral candidates over on KMIZ, but next month, voters will also get to weigh in on the 3rd and 4th Ward Council seats. We have our 4 candidates joining us tonight. For the 3rd Ward, we have current council member Carl Scala, and facing off against Tom Luther, who joins us tonight as well. And for the 4th Ward, current member Ian Thomas is running against former council member Daryl Dudley. Our panelists again are ABC 17's Lucas Geisler, Columbia Daily Tribune managing editor Jim Robertson, and Brandon Rathert from 93.9 The Eagle. We'll start again with our candidates. You guys will have 90 seconds for an opening statement, and I understand you guys already chose numbers. So, Mr. Scala, you'll be starting it off. 90 seconds.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience that came to this event, and thank you for the distinguished panel that are going to grill us pretty shortly. As a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, an MU graduate, a husband, a father of 3, and as your neighbor, I have lived and raised our family in the 3rd Ward for 35 years. And as a second-term city councilman, I bring a blend of neighborhood values, community solutions, experienced leadership, and a demonstrated dedication to our community. Columbia is a great place to live, but we need to make it even better. We have the lowest unemployment in the state. We have the cost of living of 5% below the national average. We have consistently ranked near the top in a national list of best performing cities and best places for small businesses and careers. And we just received the cleanest independent financial audit in 20 years. I'm running for re-election because I want to continue to get results for the 3rd Ward. Neglected for a long time, the 3rd Ward growth has outstripped the roads and city services as snow removal and police coverage. With the projects I have sponsored during my council terms, we are catching up, but we still have a long way to go. Multiple projects are just getting underway, including a new North Side Police Station, an East Side substation, and road improvements on Ballinger Lane and King Street. I had the experience and familiarity with how the city works to get results. I want to make the 3rd Ward an even better place to live, learn, work, and play, and I deliver. Thank you.
Mr. Scala, thank you. And now, Mr. Thomas, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I'm Ian Thomas, and I'm running for re-election to my city council seat because I'm a hardworking, accessible, and fully ethical representative of 4th Ward voters. This is in stark contrast to my opponent, who has failed to show up to multiple candidate debates and is engaging in a well-funded, dishonest, and negative campaign against me. Most recently, I've heard from many 4th Ward voters who received a push poll which falsely labeled me as an illegally hired consultant and deliberately misstated my positions on important issues in an effort to mislead voters. When I confronted Daryl about this yesterday at another forum, he said he knew nothing about it. Is that true? If it's not him, then who's running his campaign, and why are they keeping Daryl in the dark? Furthermore, his campaign has failed to register his committee or file campaign finance reports with the Missouri Ethics Commission, as required by state law. Instead, he's filed handwritten reports with the county clerk's office where the public cannot easily view them. I stake my reputation on being absolutely transparent in my life and in my work on the city council. It's clear that this is not true for my opponent. He and his campaign would rather disparage my reputation than debate me on the issues. That's not how I operate, nor how I intend to run this campaign.
Mr. Thomas, thank you. And now, Mr. Dudley, you'll have 90 seconds.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out. My name is Daryl Dudley. I'm running for election of the 4th Ward. I was on the 4th Ward from 2010 to 2013. The first that I learned about the phone calls and the push call polls was from Ian last night. No one has told me about that. I asked my campaign committee. Nobody knows where it comes from. Someone is doing it, not me, not anybody with me. I cannot do anything more than that. As far as filing with the Ethics Commission, you can do it electronically or you can do it by paper. We do it by paper. It's how we did it the first 2 times I ran. That's how we will continue to do it. It works out well for everybody in that way. You can still retrieve all the information that you want to. This is just something that's an aside to keep us away from the real issues. The reason we're campaigning is to do what's best for the City of Columbia. City of Columbia has three main issues that we're concerned about: safety, jobs, and infrastructure. We don't need to be talking about each other and what we're doing and how we don't agree with our campaign. We need to be talking about how we're going to fix the City of Columbia. We need more police officers. We need higher morale on the police department. We need to fix our aging infrastructure inside, and we need to figure out how to do it on the outside. We need to focus on the issues that are important to you, the citizens. You, the citizens, aren't too concerned about whether or not we are getting along when we're back behind the curtain. What you are concerned about is the safety, the infrastructure, and the jobs and the welfare of yourselves and your fellow citizens. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Mr. Dudley, thank you. And now, Mr. Luther, you'll have 90 seconds.
Thank you for coming out today. I am Tom Luther, and my wife and I came to Columbia to start Family Worship Center, a multicultural church, over 18 years ago. We quickly began to give back to the community by hosting fundraisers for Ellis Fischel Cancer Center. We've opened an academy and provided education for minorities and those of lower income. We are one of the most affordable private schools in Columbia. We have a debt-free facility, and we know how to prioritize our budget. I began my career as an engineer and worked as an on-site engineer at Callaway Nuclear Plant. I've earned 4 degrees, including a doctoral degree from Kingsway University and Theological Seminary. I've held many responsibilities as city, state, and area director for International Convention of Faith Ministries. I'm presently the city director for Christians United for Israel, and I'm on several and numerous not-for-profit boards, reviewing policies and budgets. I'm an active member of Rotary South and on the Government Affairs Committee for the Chamber of Commerce. My speaking engagements have taken me to several nations throughout the world. I am presently endorsed by 2 mayors, 2 state representatives, several clergy, and Columbia Police Officers Association. I've experience at problem solving, unifying people from different cultures, backgrounds, and lifestyles. I would like to enhance Columbia's economic growth, job creation, increase public safety, develop a plan for infrastructure improvement for the future development, and restore trust between the citizen and the city. I ask for your vote on April 5th.
Again, we are very glad you can make it, all 4 of you here tonight. And you'll have 1 minute to answer the question. Your opponent will have 30 seconds to rebut that. And again, you'll hear a timer like that when the time is up. So we're asking to try to stick to our time tonight. So thank you. And now we'll go over to our panelists. Lucas Geisler will be starting us out with our first question. Lucas.
All right, thank you, Marissa. Mr. Dudley, I'd like to start with you on this one. This was an issue that came up yesterday by Mr. Thomas about the push polling that was going on, seemingly on your behalf. Sounds like you did some asking around with the campaign, with your campaign, and can't seem to find out who it is that does it. I mean, does this concern you that this is going on your, it's seemingly on your behalf?
I don't know if that's on my behalf or not. Maybe it's just to go against Ian. I don't know who's doing it. Nobody that I talk to knows who's doing it. It could be coming out of somebody that's out of Cincinnati or someplace in Tennessee. People have thrown out a lot of things. You can spend money and buy these push polls from whenever you want to. I have no idea where it's coming from. I've received no information, neither has anyone else.
As a quick follow-up then, before I'll allow you, Mr. Thomas, would you like it to stop?
I didn't start it, and I don't know how is it still going on or not. I don't have that answer. I will tell you that with all the people that I talk to at the gas station every day, no one has told me about it. So,
all right. Mr. Thomas,
I would say
absolutely.
yes, it should stop.
One more time.
I would say yes, it should stop, but that is not my call. I didn't start it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. After hearing
Well,
that,
I would certainly say that disseminating false information about a candidate should certainly stop, and I would want that to happen, whoever the candidate was. I'll also ask you, Darrell, have you asked Paul Land, your treasurer, whether he knows anything about this, and what did he say?
I've spoken with everybody on my campaign committee, and nobody had any answers.
And have you asked Paul Land, your
Yes.
campaign treasurer?
Yes.
And he didn't know anything about
No,
it?
sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for addressing it as well, Mr. Dudley. I'd like to talk for a second, because part of, I believe, the push-pulling that was going on had to deal with public safety in town when it comes to police staffing as well. So recent reports have noted that the Columbia Police Department continues to struggle with low morale and issues with department unity, but also issues with community trust as well. Many critics point to department leadership as a source of the problems. Are you concerned by these reports about morale, and what is your sense of the situation at CPD? Mr. Thomas, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I've monitored these reports for many years, and I'm very concerned to have our public safety agency in a state of low morale is not a good situation, and it's been going on for a long time. One of the reasons there's low morale is that the department is severely understaffed. Estimates vary between 30 and 50 officers short of a typical city our size. And the other factor is that we have a status zero situation on patrol at many times of the shift, meaning that every single officer who's on duty at that time is currently engaged on a call, and the next emergency call that comes in, there's no one to assign to that call, or somebody has to be pulled off another call. Clearly, we need to expand the department. We did try to do that a year and a half ago. I was a strong supporter of that ballot measure, but it failed. I feel that the city did not make a strong, positive case and did not create the kind of vision that we need to see. And my number one priority, if reelected, is to do that.
Excellent. Mr. Dudley.
Many years ago, or not too many years ago, our police force is one of the best police forces in Missouri. Officers want to come here from all over the state. That has changed because of the morale inside. Some say it's the leadership or the way that things were changed when the leadership came in that we currently have. We have gone through several chiefs over the last several years, and we need to find a way to get back to the morale that we had. When we had the two interim chiefs, things started going downhill. We need to find out why, go back to that. We need to bring the funding. We have a...
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Dudley. Yeah, I appreciate it. Brandon.
All right, thank you, Mr. Scala. My first question is for you. It seems City Manager Mike Mathis has been a polarizing figure in this community, at least amongst the public with the city council members. He seems to get glowing reviews. I know you guys have given him great reviews in the public. I think there is a different opinion of him, especially following his raise. At a city council meeting on February the 1st, representatives for city employees asked for a raise that was equal in percentage to that of City Manager Mike Mathis. Right. Do you find this reasonable? And if so, how would you propose to make it work?
I do find that very reasonable, and actually that was the argument that I made. There have been some real difficulties with evaluations of the city manager. I was out of office for 3 years. Prior to that, the 3 years that I was in office, we had regular evaluations every year for the city manager. When I came back after being out of office for 3 years, I found out that there had been no evaluations for a couple of years. And Barbara Hoppe, the former city council member from Ward 6, and I were talking about this whole problem, and the human resources took over the issue of crafting the evaluations for the city manager, which I somehow thought was kind of improper. But nonetheless, at least we started the ball rolling with regard to evaluations. At one of the city council meetings, I actually introduced a motion to reduce the amount of the raise that the rest of the city council had suggested for the city manager to a level that was consistent with the rest of the staff. That proposal never even got a second, so we didn't discuss it.
Mr. Luther, you think that was reasonable for other employees to ask for the same percentage of pay raise as the city manager?
Yeah, I think it's real reasonable, but I'd like to ask Mr. Scala how he proposed to pay for it. Is he planning on raising taxes, or how do you propose to increase the budget to pay for this?
How do I propose to pay for what?
The increase in salaries for our city employees.
That's already within the budget, but you recall that I essentially raised the issue to reduce that raise for the city manager in lieu of trying to get some equity between the city staff and the city manager. I didn't even receive a second for the amendment proposal that I made. And then it went forward, and he was given a raise commensurate with his position.
You probably didn't get a second because nobody approved it.
I beg your pardon. Of course, that's what a second is all about.
You just said you didn't get a second.
That's correct. But that's correct. But if we couldn't even discuss it, then it was an issue that was already settled in terms of giving the city manager a raise. That was the will of the city council. I'm only one member on the city council.
I'm
And
afraid
hopefully not more.
Okay, we'll get to the next
All right,
question.
let's stick with his question, Mr. Dudley.
The city manager got a raise based on what the city council thought that was the performance of his job. In my opinion, he should have refused that raise. He wasn't able to give a big enough raise to the rest of the employees. Let them have the employees need to have raises. We need to consider them too.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. You got 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I believe in equity between different levels of the administration. I spoke out against the pay raise for Mike Mathis and supported Carl's proposal for a lesser pay raise. That did not gain traction with the rest of the council. The case was made that the city manager might leave and be hired by another city, which may or may not be a reasonable concern, but that was weighing on the council's mind at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is, I'll start with Mr. Luther. Mr. Luther, in 2014, 45% of Columbia voters favored a ballot measure to increase development fees. Clearly, voters are divided on this issue. It lost 55 to 45%. But is there a way to find middle ground and move Columbia forward instead of continuing the push-pull of conflict over this issue?
Yes, sir. I really believe there is a way to move forward, and I believe we can unite the city of Columbia to do that. And I believe one of the ways we're going to be able to move forward is to be more of an inviting city for businesses. Not like my opponent who voted against CVS, which stifled $350,000 worth of property tax, $85,000 worth of sales revenue tax, and even CVS was willing to pay for $700,000 worth of infrastructure. And before you say that's just not true, I would say I would invite you to talk to the legal representation of CVS.
Mr. Scala?
Well, rather than talk to the legal representation of CVS, I would rather do my own research, and I have been unable to verify the numbers that you're suggesting. These are outrageous numbers that you're suggesting, and we did take a look at, frankly, at some of the revenues generated by Walgreens. That would be their competitors right across the street, and there was nothing even approaching the numbers that you're suggesting. So I submit it depends on who you're listening to. CVS is an interesting issue because if CVS had followed the law and weren't willing to essentially stick it to Columbia, they could have been in business already.
I like to rebuttal that, but the law was a working second story. Why does the government want to interfere with a working second story?
We can get a chance to address that in the next question.
Yeah, this one's for Mr. Scala.
Pardon me?
I have a question for you, sir.
Certainly.
You have questioned the effectiveness of Regional Economic Development, Inc., REDI, in its current form. Your critics, including a publicly vocal mayor, say the public-private partnership is extremely effective and that your efforts threaten staff morale and the agency's positive benefit to the Columbia area. Are you still dissatisfied with the status of REDI?
I am not dissatisfied with REDI and the kind of work that they do. As a matter of fact, there is a proposal in the works for a manufacturing facility on the north side of town in the 3rd Ward that can produce lots of jobs. They're doing yeoman's work. I appreciate REDI from the perspective of dealing with retention and entrepreneurial activity. What I object to is the fact that when REDI was first established, it was 5 or 6 members, 2 of which were from the city, the mayor and the city manager. Subsequently, there are now 18 members of REDI, and there are still only 2 representatives from the city, the mayor and the city manager. We are subsidizing it for good reason. We are giving money to REDI to subsidize their staff to the tune of $500,000, almost $500,000 a year. But we need better representation with the city rather than the representation that has grown over time to the private sector. That's the reason that I was criticizing REDI, and I will pursue that criticism to try and reestablish that kind of equity in terms of what the voters get and the taxpayers get for their investment.
Mr. Luther, is there merit in Mr. Scala's argument?
There is some merit in his argument, but however, I'm for less government and more free market and capital-free enterprise.
All right. So in 2010, while on the topic of businesses here, in 2010, IBM arrived in Columbia with the help of $30 million in state and local incentives and a promise from them of up to 800 high-paying jobs by the end of 2012. At last report, IBM employed 388 full-time employees and my
You're
question's
okay,
out of time.
Lucas. You can continue.
You have
I
more
think that was
That's
a
all I
mistake.
have. And the state has, but the state, with that number, has suspended the company's eligibility for tax breaks. The city continues to pay $300,000 a year for the building that houses them. A question for Mr. Thomas. The candidate to your left has been sort of an outspoken critic of the process that IBM went through to come to town. Where do you stand on this issue? Was this a wise use of public money, these business incentives?
Yeah, I was not on the council when the IBM deal went through. I was not a big fan of it, and I was certainly not a big fan of all the secrecy that surrounded it and lack of transparency, that even the city council didn't know what was going on until it was basically a done deal. Don't think that's the way to run publicly accountable government. But I've talked to Stacey Button at Ready. I'm very encouraged by what I hear. She tells me that there are basically three initiatives that Ready undertakes. Firstly, to grow local entrepreneurs with a lot of incubator activities and sessions bringing together young innovators. Secondly, to support existing local businesses. And thirdly, to attract large employers from outside the community to set up here. She says that 90% of her and her staff's effort and resources go to the first two, which I'm very supportive of. I've been working with her and a number of social entrepreneurs and social business owners in the community to create some kind of an event to put a spotlight on social businesses, organizations that work to address a social issue as well as to make a business profit.
Excellent. Mr. Dudley, looking back now about 6 years, it was the attracting IBM and looking at the jobs that they have now based on what they promised, a good deal for the city?
The best deal for the city was we wound up with a building. We will end up with that building if we don't. When Ready, and I was not on the council when that was all negotiated. What I will say about that is that you are in a negotiation, you are sitting with the business across the table. You can only listen to what they're saying and what they're promising you. The city had backups for what they did if they didn't work out the way it was supposed to. IBM has lost their tax advantage. We still have the building. They still employ 300 people. They didn't employ as many people as we wanted, but we do have jobs out there where they are. Ready is doing an excellent job.
Okay.
Is it possible to comment?
I guess
We can get to it later
Well, let me
on.
go ahead and then pose the same question then to the third ward candidates on this. We'll start with Mr. Luther. If you
Well,
like.
Mr. Dudley, I agree. It has provided jobs, and we still do have a building that is worth $10 million in equity. And I think that's a plus for the city of Columbia.
Mr. Scala, please.
Yeah, and frankly, that's the argument that I made. I did vote for the IBM deal. I was very critical of the way this came down. There was a tremendous amount of secrecy, and Bill Watkins at the time, who was the city manager, I accidentally let it slip that it was even IBM. We were talking about Project Tiger for a long time at that last council meeting. We didn't know it was IBM, and the only thing that we were asked was to decide whether or not we were going to supply $3 million for the building, which had the potential of a $10 million improvement. And as I saw it, that was a no-risk kind of situation. We had no knowledge of any state involvement and eventually the $30 million subsidy that went, and the lack of clawback provisions that prevented us from knowing exactly how many jobs were involved in this whole process.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And gentlemen, obviously we'd like to let you all respond and have as much time as you want, but due to the time constraints of TV, that's why we have to be kind of tight and on schedule. I want to start with Mr. Luther. In 1952, Columbia adopted a city charter and council city manager form of government. We're approaching 180,000 in population for the city of Columbia. Do you think it's maybe time to consider changing Columbia's city charter to where we have a strong, and I already see Mr. Thomas's response, but I'll ask you, I'll start with you.
I want to clarify, my response was the 180,000.
It's 120.
Yeah, that was what I was correcting you on.
The U.S. Census Bureau says differently. By
That may be
2020, by 2020.
Oh,
by
By
2020.
2020. Yeah, we're approaching. Is what I said is we're approaching
Okay.
120. My next question is going to be about listening to your constituents, by the way.
But that's also a projection, so we don't know if that's really going to happen.
Yeah, it's just a projection, but that's what the U.S. Census Bureau says. My question, Mr. Luther, is it time for to consider changing the city's charter to a strong form mayor of government, where we have a mayor that has more power than a city manager does?
You know, I've been a real proponent of preparation precedes manifestation. And I believe if we want growth, we do have to prepare for a greater future here. So yes, I do propose a stronger mayor voice in our city.
All right, Mr. Scala?
Well, if you take a look at the literature and the demographics, usually you grow out of a city manager form of government into a strong mayor form of government when you reach a certain level. That's usually 300, 400, 500,000 people. We are not there yet. I mean, the city manager form of government was established to avoid the kinds of corruption that Tammany Hall had and Chicago had and so on and so forth. So there was a separation of implementation and policy making. I don't think it's a good idea at this point to move to a strong mayor form of government. It would require a professional city council and staff.
Mr. Dudley, what about you? Is that something that you would support, a strong form mayor of government for the city of Columbia?
If we go to that, we'll have to start paying the mayor and start paying everybody more. We're already running short on money in our budget to even come up with more officers to make the city safer. What we have now with the size of the city that we have is working well. We might consider having more people on the council, opening up 2 more wards. That was considered during the last census. What I would say is that stay with the one that we have until we get about half again bigger or twice as big as what we are now, as Mr. Scala stated, because we don't have the money or the time to do all that right now. But we can study the effects.
All right, thank you. How about you, Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I'd support exploring this idea of going to a full-time paid mayor and council, as a number of cities do at a certain size. I'd want to hear from some of those cities that have been through that transition, how that went, maybe some that decided not to and why they decided not to. But I can tell you it is a full-time job, doing a proper job of being on the city council. And unless you have a supportive spouse or you're retired with savings, you really cannot afford the time to do the job properly, and that discriminates against people.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, Mr. Thomas. You recently supported a reopening and a discussion about the route of a controversial electric transmission line in South Columbia, even though the council had been briefed by staff about aspects of the line on 14 separate occasions, had approved the route and even offered it to voters as part of a capital improvement spending campaign. The Tribune, as early as July 2013, noted that residents along the proposed route were concerned about the route, and now dissatisfaction with other options has prompted a recall campaign against the Fifth Ward representative. Critics say reopening the discussion was a costly mistake. Do you agree or disagree, and how should the city solve this infrastructure problem?
No, I don't think that reopening the discussion was a costly mistake. I think it was in the best interests of the voters, and that was why I supported reopening the discussion and asking for more information. This is an important decision. This is going to cost the city tens of millions of dollars, and there may be as much as a $10 million difference between one option and another. What I found when I dug deeply into the data provided for the option A and option B was that the option A was not only much more expensive than option B, but it also impacted 4 times as many property owners compared with option B. Now, that information was not really made available to us in 2013, and in fact, the information has changed dramatically on cost since 2013. So I have asked a series of much more detailed questions, which I just received responses from staff to quite recently, and I'll be reviewing that and deciding how I think we should move forward at this point.
Mr. Dudley?
The city took too long moving forward.
Sorry, that was me.
The city,
Go ahead.
I don't think this is on that. The city took a long time to move forward with the plan once option A come up. When I was on the council, I opted an option that went around the city and went down through McBain and came up on the outskirts of the city, thus avoiding where all the population was. That's still an option that needs to be considered. We need to look at the data that we have from the studies that were done, look at that data, see how it will fit on B1 and B2 to turn those into 161 kV lines and bring that around where it isn't going to impact the people. Let the city grow into the lines as they've done in many places. In Mesa, they...
Thank you.
And maybe I'll just add that I agree with that, and it is extremely unusual to ram these massive 161 kilovolt poles and wires down a fully developed corridor, which is what Border School Road, Nifong, and Grindstone is. Very unusual, and I couldn't find any examples in other cities, and neither could the staff.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley, you said in a recent debate, in fact yesterday, I think, that the police department needs additional officers. You would not raise taxes to pay for them, but instead find the money in places that are not necessarily necessary to job growth, safety, and infrastructure. You're not a stranger to city budget. What general areas would you look for savings to pay for those officers?
Each of us has our own home. We have a budget in our home. You have things that are on that budget that have to be paid for first. You need water, you need light, you need food. Those are the first three things that you have in your house. In the city level, we have safety, jobs, and infrastructure. Those are the first three things that we have to spend money on. We talk to the police chief. He is the person that tells us what we need for a fully staffed and fully funded police department. Not the city manager, not the mayor, not anyone else. The police chief. He's in charge of the police department. What we do then is we fund the police department, we fund the fire department, and then we go with the jobs and the infrastructure, whichever one you want to put first of those two. After that, with money that we have left over in our $500 million budget, then we start looking at other projects. By doing it that way, some pet projects and some aside projects may have to be dismissed or even overlooked. But we have to start with the first three first: safety, jobs, and infrastructure. When we have money left over, we look at other things.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, we do need to expand our police department. We are going to need to find new funds. Darrell's suggestions don't hold any water. There aren't anything like enough funds being used for the purposes that he thinks they shouldn't be used for. We will have to find a new funding source. But we don't want to just bring a proposal for a funding source. We have to do a community visioning about our police department. And it needs to involve the officers themselves, the chief, and the community. One of the things that I've been researching over the last year or so is community policing or neighborhood policing philosophy. It's very effective, and I think that we can do that here, but we need the community's support.
Sticking on that point, for the third ward candidates, Mr. Luther, certainly hiring more police officers would have, maybe, some effect on reducing crime. For the third ward in particular, where we're at right now, actually, what's your vision in reducing crime? So let's say you get the officers. What do you do with them? How do you reduce crime?
Well, then you go ahead and you ask the chief of police to put those officers in those hot spots where crime is so prevalent. And they're doing some community sharing with the police officers at this particular time in the community. And according to the Tribune, that's being very effective right now.
Mr. Scala, what do you do?
Yes, actually, we are taking measures as we speak. There are two things. Once we lost that ballot issue in 2014 with respect to hiring 40 or 50 more police officers, which would enable us to engage in this community policing on a reasonable scale, we had to look into the budget for capital costs, and we decided that we were going to establish a north side police station to increase efficiencies, increase response times, and so on. That north side police station is going to be located in the 2nd Ward, and we are having a police substation on the east side in between Demerit Drive and the county and the city where there is a crime spillover. So there are tangible things happening with respect to policing.
Okay. I wanted to ask, before we get too far away from the transmission line project, many of the city's biggest projects that they work on rely on the work of consultants and consulting firms. The transmission line project with Sega Incorporated, for example, the sewer planning currently being done. and right now also with the bus system, hiring a consultant to figure out the best way to handle that. Now, the city chooses those consulting firms and relies on their work heavily, but they choose the firms without any public input. I'd like to ask this question of Mr. Dudley. You had served on the city council as well. Do you think that's a fair process? Should that change?
Are you saying that the city is selecting the consulting group without any public input?
I'm asking if the city should, the process of receiving proposals from consulting firms and picking the one to examine the issue.
The city has the expertise on who they're selecting as the consultants. I do not. I don't know how many of us in the room have a list of consultants or a catalog of consultants. So no, I don't know that we can have the public input. What we do have to have is more public input with the consultants while they're doing it, so that the public can give their suggestions and find out what's going on and what it is that the consultant is looking at. So we should have more input from the public with the consultant, but as far as the selection of the consultant, I can't see any benefit to that.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, would you like
With respect, Lucas, I think the premise of the question is wrong. The community does really have input on that. For the recent process to select the public transportation consultant, for which there were, I believe, 9 applications, a stakeholder committee, including community members and key stakeholder groups like the University of Missouri, was set up to review all of the applications and make recommendations. Staff did make the final selection, but they reviewed all of the recommendations of the committee, and then it came to council, and we are elected by the people, and we made the final choice to either support the staff's recommendation or not.
Okay. Thank you both. Brandon?
Thank you. Mr. Scala, as you know, obviously, earlier this year, City Manager Mike Mathis unveiled a 3-year strategic plan to guide city policy and spending. There were several areas of emphasis, but the 3 I want to focus on, I want to ask you to kind of prioritize them in your mind. What do you think are most important? The 3 that I picked out, economy, infrastructure, public safety. So if you could kind of prioritize those in your mind, economy, infrastructure, public safety, and then given the limits of revenue and then our ability to increase revenue, use that to maybe kind of define your priorities.
Yeah, frankly, when we take citizen surveys, and we do this each and every year, we always find public safety at the top of the list. We find infrastructure next on the list. We find the economy and economic development next on the list. And importantly, this last summer, the city manager and the city council got together to talk about a strategic plan that also talked about social equity. I think that piece is very, very important. We can't neglect all the rest of it. We have to take care, certainly, of public safety. We have increased police officers by 9 police officers in the last 3 years, and firefighters by 5. We, in fact, are in terms of the infrastructure piece, we are starting to get some equity in infrastructure into the 3rd Ward and 2nd Ward and 1st Ward with this targeted approach, if you will, to those underserved areas that were classically neglected. And in terms of economic development, I am for economic development, but sustainable economic development, not the kinds of development.
So social equity would be number 1 on your list.
Social equity is a very important piece, and it's a change in direction for this.
Mr. Luther, economy, public safety, infrastructure, how would you prioritize those?
I'd prioritize it, Brandon, with
All
public
right.
safety first. Okay? Because 46% in violent crime is too much for the city of Columbia, and it's keeping businesses away from the city of Columbia. Also, infrastructure is a high priority. But the question here is, how are we going to fund it? Well, according to our 2014 budget that's in the city of Columbia, that was provided by the city of Columbia, 10% of our budget goes to public safety. We raise that by 1%, then we increase the budget for public safety by $4.5 million.
Let me ask you my second question, and I'll start with Mr. Dudley on this one. Kind of considering the previous question that I asked Mr. Luther and Mr. Scala, how do we, we want public safety, we want more cops, we want all this, but we don't want to raise our property taxes to pay for this. So number 1, how do you get the funding? And how do you sell it to the people?
Again, we start looking at the budget. When we're going over the budget, we start at the top and fund it. Find out how much money we have in the budget that is not directed funding. There is a lot of money in the budget that is directed that can't be used for something else. Parks tax is one of the examples. That is voted by the people to be used only for the parks. We can't look at that. But there's a lot of other money in it that we can look at There are, as you look down the many pages, it's a document that is a couple reams thick. It's a very large budget. There are a lot of line items in that. We can find things in there to cut, to move the money around where we have the ability to do that. We do not want to raise taxes. Nobody in this room is going to say raise the taxes. It was brought to the public for a vote a couple of years ago. It was defeated. Obviously, people are tired of getting the taxes. We've got to find it from in the budget that we already have, use the money we have. As I said earlier, we each have our own budget, and we all do it at our home. Now we need to do it at the city level also, and do it the way that will get everybody's safety and everybody's jobs growing and the infrastructure fixed.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, I think we've already done this question, but I disagree that people are flat out going to oppose new taxes. 40% of voters in November voted yes for that tax increase. I actually thought it was too large, what was asked for. That was a disagreement within the council. The mayor very much wanted to go for 50 police officers. I would have thought that 20 or 25 staged over several years would have been a much more reasonable ask and may well have prevailed. We also didn't run a very good campaign. I was working on a separate campaign at the exact same time and wasn't able to help with that one. But I think that with community visioning about what we want our police department to look like in the future and a neighborhood policing philosophy, we can get public support for some kind of an increase.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Luther, in a recent video compilation of you speaking to your congregation at the Family Worship Center, you seem to be critical of the LGBT population in Columbia and imply that your candidacy is a divine call to take the city. You told a reporter afterward that the video clips were taken out of context. Please explain the context, and can you reassure Columbians who are LGBT residents and supporters that you will respect their rights and represent their interests?
Well, I've respected the rights of the LGBT community that's come to our church thus far by providing food, medicine, transportation for those that are in that community. Secondly, it was taken out of proportion because that message wasn't even at my home church, and it was taken without permission. And thirdly, I'm not auditioning to be the pastor of the Columbia. I'm running for city council. What does that have to do with being city council?
Mr. Scala?
Well, I'm amazed at that answer. Whether it was another church or not, the fact of the matter is these were public sermons. They were not taken out of context. It was a compilation of those sermons, but you said it. It was in your words. I didn't post this on Facebook. It was a public pronouncement at a church that you were ministering to and expressed your opinion. And even more troubling, perhaps even more troubling than the perspective that you took, which was almost homophobic, had to do with this idea that you were sent here to make sure that you could clean this place up. I beg your pardon, but I don't think you need to clean this place up.
And you know what? As a professional editor, I can take clips and make you sound however I want to make you sound.
This was in your words.
These were taken out of context. And secondly, it was not a public forum. It was a church where I am required by the Word of God to pray for our nation. Have you read your Bible? You say you go to the Church of Christ.
All right, let's
and not only that.
Let's move along.
Let's move on. Yeah.
Mr. Scala, 55% of voters turned down a 2014 ballot measure that would have increased development fees using a trip generation model that you campaigned energetically for.
And I'm guilty as charged. That was far too complicated.
My question is, why do you think voters disagreed, and how should the city move forward on funding new infrastructure?
Well, that's a long story, but let me try and make it a short story. And that has to do with the trip generation model was a model that was produced by a consultant to the city in 2005. It was an accepted model. It was so complicated that the folks didn't understand it. We were in conversations about increasing the development fee. We should have done that. We probably should have done it in a more simple fashion, that is just increase the development fee across the board just for residential and commercial and forgot about the trip generation. We'll probably revisit that in the future. But that the defeat of that proposal, it was defeated by a group called Citizens for Better Columbia, which is back now, reviving their funds. There were $150,000 generated in the last 2 weeks of that campaign by 15 members of this community that you would recognize from the development community. They're back starting to fund this PAC to defeat progressive candidates. And that was the source of the defeat of that proposal. It was actually a very close election when it fared better than the public safety proposal that it was paired with.
Thank you. Mr. Luther, do you have a comment on that development piece?
Well, that's part of the problem with our development here in town. What my opponent doesn't seem to understand is that every time you increase development fees, it gets passed on to the consumer. And we're already the highest cost of living city in the state of Missouri. When is it going to stop? We need to provide more economic growth and better jobs for our city.
Thank you.
This is another question for you, Mr. Luther, back on the topic of public safety. I wanted to go back to an earlier forum. I believe it was hosted by the Disabilities Commission. You mentioned in an earlier forum, and I want to make sure that I get your thoughts right on this, that you mentioned that more security cameras in town might be a effective tool to help deter crime. A recent report from Columbia Police showed that the current cameras that they use downtown, that the ones that the police operate downtown, led to arrests in only 23% of the cases that they caught on camera down there. 23% of them. Are they worth the public investment the way that they're used right now, or are they an encroachment on privacy the way that they're used now?
Well, that's 23% of criminals that are behind bars right now. And I think that's important. Now, not every video is going to work well in a criminal justice system. However, one of the things that the cameras were able to do was after a man was savagely beaten, the cameras that were made available, the security cameras that were made available in the parking garage, is what led to the arrest of these gentlemen. And my opponent has voted against these safety cameras, and he voted not to reopen the discussion even after this young man was savagely beaten.
Go for it, Mr. Scala.
That's absolute nonsense. I mean, there have been and there have always been security cameras in the parking garages in this city, always. That had nothing to do with the surveillance cameras for downtown streets and sidewalks, which was an issue that the entire council opposed. In part, I probably lost an election because of that wedge issue for the surveillance cameras. And 23% of these folks are not in jail as a result of some tips leading to this. This has been a very big mistake, and I would have answered your question more simply if I could by just saying no.
Okay.
I want to get to another issue here. Excuse me. When it comes to housing, we'll stay with you, Mr. Scala. There's a 3-year waiting list right now for subsidized housing in Boone County. The average home price in the 65202 zip code, which is the least costly area in the county, is more than $150,000. Yet more than a quarter of Columbia residents earn less than the federal poverty level. And what should the City Council do to increase the availability of affordable housing?
Well, we are trying to do something as we speak. Part of the strategic plan that the city got together with the city manager and the city council was to focus on underserved areas. That clearly is too expensive for some of the needs. The 65202 designation that you mentioned is Third Ward. And there are some very neglected, very underserved areas in the Third Ward. Part of this issue with respect to equity and evening out the playing field, if you will, is to try and redress some of those grievances. We recently had a capital improvement sales tax where we had $45 million for new roads for the next 10 years. 51% of that budget went to the Fifth Ward. That is not equity as it relates to this city. We should be evening up the playing field, if you will, in terms of not only infrastructure, but also housing costs. We're also getting started with an initiative for tiny homes, which is an area that's necessary for the homeless, not only veterans, but other folks who cannot afford the kinds of $150,000 price tags you're talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Luther, should the city do more with affordable housing, and if so, how?
You know, I think the government needs to be out of affordable housing, to be honest with you. Habitat for Humanity is doing a great job. They have a very large budget to provide affordable housing. And part of the problem is that every 3 years we have change in council. And until that council understands what the purpose of the last council was, they may not have vision for affordable housing the next time we elect councilmen. So I'm not really for the city getting involved in affordable housing. I think the private sector and the not-for-profit sector ought to handle that.
I'd like to jump in on this. If we leave it to the free market, we won't get any affordable housing. And one of the things that we are moving forward on right now is a community land trust.
We have time
This
for...
is a very effective strategy that cities across the United States have used to develop permanently affordable housing, and it's got strong support on council, and it's got strong support throughout the community.
All right, we have time for one more question.
All right, one more question. Mr. Dudley, there's two mayoral candidates. We saw them debate earlier tonight, Skip Walther and Brian Treese. Who, in your mind, would make a better mayor for the city of Columbia?
Each of them have their own benefits. You're asking me to go out on a limb here.
Yeah, I am.
When I was on the council from 10 to 13, I worked with both of them. They both have differing opinions on growth and on economy and on the way that we should develop downtown and the outlying areas. Each of them, as I say, brings their own benefits to the table, and I'm not certain yet just exactly which one. These forums are a pretty good way to find out what they're saying.
Do we have time for responses, Marissa?
Sure.
All right, Mr. Thomas.
Well, I agree with you, Darrell. I think they're both very good candidates. And one of the areas where they do differ is on development fees. I haven't had the chance to talk about this yet, so I want to just let everybody know. I conducted a very detailed study of 10 years' worth of capital improvement projects and demonstrated that as we grow, as we have to spend tens of millions of dollars on new infrastructure for new growth, about 85% of that cost is burdened onto current ratepayers and taxpayers, and only 15% is charged to the new development that drives that growth.
All right, and we will move on to our closing statements tonight. Again, each of you guys will have 90 seconds to make your closing statements, and we'll just go in the opposite order. So we'll start with you first, Mr. Luther.
Well, thank you for coming out. My record of partnering with education at Douglas High School, being a part of a drug rehabilitation for women with children, and raising money for Ellis Fischel Cancer Center demonstrates my desire for social equity. My endorsement from Columbia Police Officers Association validates my desire for more police officers and increased safety. My endorsement of two other city mayors and clergy of different faith validates my willingness to unite and not to divide. You know, my opponent is right when he says I don't have the same experience that he has. I don't have the experience of hindering economic growth. I don't have the experience of stopping job creation. I don't have the experience of making wrong decisions for the city that most citizens of our community thinks hinders the future of Columbia. I happen to think that the hardworking citizens of Third Ward want someone that will represent them well in public safety, economic security, infrastructure development, and most of all, honest and transparent city government. It would be an honor to serve you as Third Ward Councilman, and I'm asking for your vote on April 5th.
Mr. Dudley. Mr. Dudley, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's been an honor to be here in front of you and tell you tonight all of our plans and our views for the future of Columbia. Again, the most important things for each of us is safety, infrastructure, and jobs. If we don't have safety, people aren't going to come to town. People don't go out at night. An increase of 46% in violent crimes in the last year is not an acceptable situation to have in the city. People don't want to come here from outlying cities because they're afraid that they could get hurt or they could get mugged. That's not a good thing. We need to get rid of that. We need to fund the police department. We need to look at the budget, find it, and without raising the taxes for all of you. When I was on the council from 2010 to 2013, I worked with a lot of different people with varying interests. I was able to bring some agreement on some parks and some trails and with some different things over in the 4th Ward in the Central Park. I look forward to doing that again. I look for your vote on the 5th of April. And thank you very much for coming in.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, my priorities, if re-elected, will be to do the community visioning and expand our police department based on community support, develop an equitable allocation of costs for infrastructure, and create jobs for entry-level jobs for people that struggle to get those jobs at the moment, and build sustainable local businesses. Those are the priorities for me. Those are the priorities for Columbia. And I know that because I'm a very engaged council member working with my constituents. I have an email newsletter list of almost 2,000 voters within Columbia who I communicate with regularly, and it's growing all the time. I do online surveys to test what people are thinking and make sure that my positions are in line with what people are thinking. And I hold constituent conversations at a coffee shop in the 4th Ward on Sunday afternoons. So I represent the 4th Ward of Columbia fairly and transparently, and I hope to garner your vote if you're a 4th Ward resident. Thank you.
And Mr. Scala, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who has attended, and thank you to the panel. My priorities are very similar. Public safety is a priority first. Better roads and city services is a priority. Good jobs is a priority. Economic development. And then a fighting chance. And by that, I mean the social equity piece and even some of the racial equity issues that we have in this community. I'm running for re-election because I want to continue to get results for the 3rd Ward, and I deliver on those results. The 3rd Ward's been neglected for a long time. Growth has outstripped the roads and city services, snow removal. We've annexed lots of property. We can't keep up with that. The projects I've sponsored during my council terms, we're doing better, but we need to catch up. And multiple projects are just getting underway. The police station on the north side of town, a substation on the east side of town next to Demerit Drive to prevent some of the spillover from the county. And an important note, there are many reasons why any citizen may run for city council, and I agree with Mr. Luther on this in terms of the experience, but the experiences he describes are quite different. Even despite civic inexperience, his civic inexperience, I firmly believe that personal agendas based on discriminatory beliefs have no place in our community's civic arena. I believe that the YouTube video of my opponent's public pronouncements with now more than 2,800 views, search Luther Exposed, speaks for itself.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for coming out to tonight's event and getting involved in your city government. And we'd like to thank all 4 of you tonight, Mr. Scala, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Dudley, Mr. Luther. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we would also like to thank our 2 candidates for mayor as well, Mr. Walther and Mr. Treese, for both making it out tonight. And our panelists, Lucas Geisler, Jim Robertson, and Brandon Rather, thank you for joining us. And we really appreciate you coming. And again, thank you for joining us for Debate 16. Have a great night.